Elias Kane was a man defined by solitude. The vast plains of his ranch stretched endlessly, the horizon melting into sky. And yet no matter how far his gaze wandered, it could not fill the emptiness he felt within. He had inherited the ranch from his father, a sprawling piece of land rich with rolling pastures, meandering creeks, and herds of cattle that demanded constant attention. From the outside, Elias's life might have seemed enviable wealth, independence, and the freedom to shape his days as he pleased, but the reality was far from the picture of contentment. He had no family to share the land with, no partner to sit by the fire in the quiet evenings, no child to call him father. The years had passed with steady routine and relentless work, but the ache of loneliness only grew sharper as he aged. Elias rose early each morning, before the sun had even painted the first streaks of gold across the prairie. The rhythm of his life was set by the ranch feeding the animals, checking fences, tending the fields, and repairing the weather-beaten barns. These tasks were physically demanding, yes, but they provided a measure of comfort. They were familiar, reliable, and they distracted him from the gnawing emptiness in his heart. Yet, no amount of work could replace the warmth of human companionship. Friends were few, and the townspeople, though polite enough, kept their distance, intimidated by his stern demeanor and imposing presence. Elias had never married, never known the soft comfort of a loving touch or the gentle reassurance of shared life. His father's death had left him the ranch, but also a legacy of solitude that weighed on him like the heavy winter snow that blanketed the plains each year. Despite his solitary existence, Elias was not bitter. He had a quiet dignity, a sense of honor, and a steady hand that earned him respect among his peers. He had built his wealth through hard work and careful management of his land, and yet, beneath his rugged exterior, a part of him longed for something he could not manufacture or control. He longed for love, not fleeting infatuation, but the deep, enduring connection that comes from trust, respect, and shared life. He longed for family, a child to teach the ways of the land, someone to pass his knowledge and dreams on to. Most nights, as the wind whispered through the tall prairie grasses and the stars spread like diamonds across the sky, Elias felt the silent ache of his longing more acutely than ever. The ranch itself seemed a reflection of his life, beautiful, prosperous, and untamed, yet lacking warmth and laughter. The barns were filled with hay and tools, the fields with cattle and crops, but there was no small hand to help gather eggs, no soft voice to break the morning silence. Even his dog, loyal as he was, could not fill the void in his heart. In the evenings, Elias would sit alone by the hearth sipping strong coffee and watching the flames dance, imagining what it might be like to have someone by his side, someone who would see him not just as a rancher, but as a man capable of love, tenderness, and devotion. Yet, in the midst of his loneliness, there was a quiet hope buried deep beneath the routine and the pain. Elias had learned to wait, to believe that life might still hold surprises for him. He had not given up entirely on the possibility of companionship, though the years had taught him patience and caution. In his heart he still dreamed of a life transformed, of laughter echoing through the halls of his home, of tiny footprints in the dust and the warmth of another soul beside him as the sun rose and set over the endless prairie. Little did Elias know that the opportunity for change, for love, and for the miracle he had longed for would soon appear in the most unexpected form, a young woman, desperate and alone, whose arrival would begin to fill the emptiness of his life in ways he had never imagined. In the dusty, sun-beaten town not far from Elias's ranch, a young woman named Clara lived under a shadow that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. At barely 18, she had already been marked by hardship, born into a family where love was scarce and greed and survival governed every choice. Her mother, Martha, was a woman hardened by life and embittered by disappointment, who saw her daughter not as a child to protect, but as a commodity to trade for money. Clara's father had disappeared years ago, leaving them in poverty. and what little warmth remained in their home had long since been extinguished by resentment and selfishness. Clara's predicament was made more desperate by the fact that she was pregnant. The father of her child was a man who had abandoned her at the first sign of responsibility, leaving her alone to face the harsh judgment of the townspeople. Whispers followed her wherever she went. The unwed mother, the girl who brought shame. Each insult cut deep, but none were as painful as the betrayal by her own mother. Martha, seeing her daughter's pregnancy not as a cause for care, but as an opportunity for profit, devised a plan that would forever alter the course of Clara's life. She announced to the town that she would sell Clara to the highest bidder, a legal loophole or a desperate custom in the frontier. She did not care, as long as she gained gold in return. Clara's heart ached with fear and despair. She had no friends in town who would help her, no relatives to protect her. Each day, she felt the heavy burden of her circumstances pressing down, making it difficult to breathe. The world around her seemed to have hardened into a place of cruelty, a place where kindness was rare and survival came at the expense of others. She knew that resistance was futile. If she did not comply with her mother's demand, she would be left destitute, homeless, and vulnerable to the harsh winter or the predatory men who roamed the outskirts of the town. Yet even as she bowed to necessity, Clara refused to surrender her spirit entirely. She carried within her the tiny spark of hope, the hope that life could change, that someone might see her not as a burden, but as a person deserving of care and dignity. The townspeople watched the arrangement with curiosity and judgment. Some whispered in secret, disgusted by the idea of a mother selling her own child. Others shrugged, accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier life, where survival often demanded choices that seemed cruel by the standards of more civilized lands. None, however, offered Clara a helping hand, leaving her with only a quiet resolve and the secret dream that someone, somewhere might step in to save her from this cruel fate. As the day of the transaction approached, Clara prepared herself with a mixture of fear, resignation, and cautious hope. She packed a small bundle of clothes and a few meager belongings, each item a tangible reminder of her past and the life she had known, fragile as it was. She knew she would be leaving behind everything familiar, stepping into the unknown, and perhaps into the hands of a man who might see her as nothing more than a possession. But in her heart, she clung to the belief that not all men were cruel, that perhaps one soul in the world still valued compassion over profit. It was on this day, amid the dust and heat of the marketplace, that fate began to shift. Clara, trembling but determined, stood as her mother negotiated with the town's visitors, unaware that her life was about to intersect with a man whose own loneliness mirrored hers, and whose heart, though closed and wary, was capable of offering the protection, dignity, and perhaps love she so desperately needed. The stage was set for an encounter that would change both their lives forever, an unexpected meeting that would ignite hope. Where despair had once reigned and sow the seeds of a miracle neither of them could have anticipated. The sun hung high in the dusty sky as Elias Kane rode into the small town, the rhythmic clatter of his horse's hooves echoing off the wooden storefronts. He had come to sell some of his cattle and purchase supplies, nothing more, yet the day would prove far from ordinary. His sharp eyes, accustomed to scanning miles of open plains, caught a commotion near the center of the marketplace. A small crowd had gathered, and at its heart stood a young woman, her posture tense, her eyes wary, as her mother barked at a man whose hands gripped coins and papers. Elias slowed his horse instinctively, curiosity piqued, and felt a tug he could not immediately explain, a subtle, persistent pull toward the scene unfolding before him. As he drew closer, he recognized the situation immediately. Clara, frail yet composed despite her obvious fear, was at the mercy of her mother's greed. The words exchanged were sharp, transactional, devoid of any compassion. Elias's chest tightened. Though he had faced many challenges on the plains and negotiated countless deals in his life, nothing struck him with the same visceral intensity as this sight. A young woman sold like livestock, her fate being determined by the selfishness of another. It was a moment that stirred a protective instinct deep within him, one he had not felt in years, and it ignited a resolve that surprised even himself. He dismounted, boots thudding against the wooden boards of the marketplace. The townspeople glanced at him, some with curiosity, some with caution. Elias had the kind of presence that commanded attention without a word. He strode directly to the negotiating pair, his gaze fixed on Clara, who met his eyes for the first time. In that instant, something passed between them, a flicker of recognition, not of familiarity, but of understanding. Elias saw not just vulnerability, but resilience. Not just fear, but a quiet, stubborn strength that refused to break despite the odds. Clara, for her part, sensed the difference immediately. There was no hunger for profit in Elias's eyes, no selfish calculation, only a steady, undeniable seriousness and concern. "Enough," Elias said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. The crowd murmured in surprise. He turned to Clara's mother, his eyes cold and unyielding. "I will take responsibility for her. She will come with me." "That's final." The words carried weight, authority, and promise all at once. Martha's lips parted in shock, disbelief flashing across her features. The notion that someone might intervene, someone willing to treat her daughter with dignity rather than as a commodity, had never occurred to her. Yet Elias's resolve was unshakable. He was a man who had spent a lifetime commanding respect, and now he commanded it for the sake of a stranger. Clara's pulse raced as she tried to process the sudden turn of events. Part of her expected deceit, a trap, or some hidden motive. She had learned long ago that hope could be dangerous, that trust was a risk she could ill afford. But Elias's demeanor, the strength and calm in his presence, began to chip away at her doubts. There was a sense of safety here, a rare possibility that she could leave behind fear and step toward something new. Hesitantly, she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I'll go with you." Elias offered his hand, a simple gesture, yet one loaded with assurance. As she placed her hand in his, a sense of quiet determination settled over them both. In that moment, the transaction ceased to feel like a mere act of rescue. It became the first step toward a life that might be different, better, and perhaps even miraculous. The townspeople whispered, some judging, others in awe, as Elias mounted his horse with Clara beside him. The dusty streets and the setting sun framed the unlikely pair, beginning a journey that would carry them far beyond the marketplace toward a future neither could yet fully imagine. On that long ride back to the ranch, silence fell between them, not awkward, but contemplative. Clara felt the first flickers of trust, and Elias, for the first time in many years, allowed himself to imagine a life shared with another. Unspoken promises hung in the air, of protection, understanding, and perhaps in time, something deeper. The encounter was over, but the story of their lives, intertwined by chance and courage, was only just beginning. The ride back to the ranch was long, the wide-open plains stretching endlessly under the late afternoon sun. Elias led his horse steadily, Clara riding beside him, her hands tightly gripping the reins. Silence hung between them at first, heavy with uncertainty. Though Elias had intervened in her plight, and though she had agreed albeit reluctantly to accompany him, the reality of her situation had not yet fully settled in. Clara's eyes darted nervously to the rugged landscape, to the untamed wilds that awaited beyond the familiar town, and to the stoic figure beside her, the man who had bought her freedom. Elias, too, wrestled with complex emotions. The transaction itself had left him uneasy despite his intentions. He had paid Martha for Clara's custody, knowing it was the only way to protect her from exploitation, yet the act of buying a human being, even to save her, clung to him like a shadow. He questioned the morality of it, the ethical weight of what he had done. Could true rescue be bought with gold? Did ownership, even if well-intentioned, diminish Clara's freedom, her dignity? Elias knew he had acted out of compassion, but the societal implications, the whispers he might face in town, and the internal conflict gnawed at him. Clara sensed his unease, though she did not understand it fully. She had spent her life being treated as property, as something to be traded, and the thought that another person could own her, even with the promise of protection, stirred fear. Yet there was a subtle difference with Elias. He did not treat her as a commodity in his manner, in his eyes, or in his tone. There was respect underlying the transaction, a clear recognition of her humanity. Still, trust was fragile, and Clara knew she must navigate this new arrangement carefully, balancing hope with self-preservation. As they approached the ranch, Elias spoke quietly, breaking the tense silence. "This place. It is harsh. Life here will demand much from both of us. You must be honest with me about what you can handle, and I will do the same." Clara nodded, understanding the unspoken message. This was not a town where she could rely on the charity of others. Here, survival depended on resilience, cooperation, and mutual trust. The ranch, though wild and untamed, offered safety, and with safety came opportunity, a chance to reclaim control over her life. The moral dilemma weighed heavily on Elias as they arrived at the ranch gates. The sprawling homestead, surrounded by rolling pastures and dotted with barns and pens, symbolized both freedom and responsibility. Elias knew that while he could provide shelter, security, and resources, he could not protect Clara from every possible threat. His actions had saved her from immediate danger, but the complexities of the frontier, the scrutiny of neighbors, and the unpredictable elements of nature remained. Did he have the right to impose his authority over her life, even with good intentions? Could he nurture her trust while maintaining the balance of power inherent in their unusual agreement? Clara, observing the ranch and the man who had intervened, felt a mixture of apprehension and cautious optimism. The land was vast and unforgiving, yet it radiated the promise of stability. Elias's presence was commanding but not overbearing, strict yet fair, and there was a sense of integrity in every decision he made. Though the purchase itself had been transactional, she recognized a rare truth. He had risked his reputation and perhaps his safety to ensure she would not suffer further harm. As night fell over the ranch, Elias and Clara sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting shadows across their faces. They spoke cautiously, sharing fragments of their lives, fears, and past wounds. Both understood that the purchase was merely the beginning, a complex, imperfect solution to an impossible situation, but also the first step toward something transformative. Elias had bought her freedom, yes, but with it came a responsibility that neither could ignore: to build trust, to create safety, and perhaps in time to allow the possibility of genuine connection to grow in the most unlikely of circumstances. In the quiet of that first night on the ranch, amidst the creak of wooden beams and the distant lowing of cattle, a fragile understanding began to take root. The moral dilemma remained, unresolved yet navigable, and both Elias and Clara realized that their future, uncertain and fraught with challenges, could also hold unexpected hope and healing. The ranch was a world unlike anything Clara had ever known. As the sun rose over the vast, rolling plains, it painted golden streaks across fields that stretched farther than her eyes could see. The air smelled of hay, earth, and animals, a scent both strange and strangely comforting. Every sound, the lowing of cattle, the distant cry of a hawk, the creak of the old barn doors, was amplified in the quiet expanse, reminding Clara just how far she was from the town and the life she had known. Here, the rules of survival were simple but relentless. Feed the animals, repair fences, tend the crops, and respect the land. There was no room for weakness, no escape from responsibility, and no one to buffer her from the consequences of failure. Elias had made the arrangements for her arrival with quiet precision. The small cabin she would occupy had been cleaned and stocked with the essentials: fresh blankets, a stove, and a modest supply of food. It was far from luxurious, but it was safe a sanctuary in its own rugged way. Yet, despite the comfort, Clara could not ignore the enormity of the life before her. The labor would be demanding, the isolation profound, and she was painfully aware that she had only Elias to rely upon in this vast, untamed landscape. The first morning on the ranch was a test of endurance. Elias began with simple instructions: feed the chickens, gather eggs, check on the cattle. His tone was firm but patient, and though he expected diligence, he also offered guidance without scorn. Clara struggled at first, her hands blistered, her back ached, and the sheer physicality of the work was daunting, but Elias's steady presence was oddly reassuring. He did not belittle her mistakes, nor did he rush her. Instead, he demonstrated, corrected gently, and allowed her the dignity of learning at her own pace. Despite the hard work, moments of unexpected tenderness began to surface. Elias brought her water during breaks, offered quiet advice on caring for the animals, and shared stories of the land that made it feel less like a prison and more like a place of potential. Clara, in turn, began to feel a flicker of respect and even curiosity about this man who had saved her. He was no longer just the one who had bought her freedom. He was a guide, a protector, and in small, unspoken ways, a companion. Yet, the adjustment was not without tension. Clara's pride and independence clashed at times with Elias's structured authority. She had survived hardship by relying on her instincts and cunning, and the strict regimen of ranch life felt foreign and confining. Elias, used to solitary decision-making and the precise management of the land, was unaccustomed to negotiating with another person on matters of routine and labor. The two of them tested boundaries in subtle ways. She questioned methods, he corrected mistakes, and each confrontation, though minor, carried the weight of their larger unspoken struggle for trust and understanding. Evenings were the hardest. The vast emptiness of the plains amplified Clara's loneliness and longing for a life that seemed forever lost. But Elias, too, was learning to navigate these quiet moments. He found himself watching her, noting the subtle expressions of weariness, resilience, and cautious hope. There was a growing awareness between them, a delicate dance of observation and instinct, each recognizing the other's vulnerabilities without yet acknowledging the deeper emotions stirring beneath the surface. By the end of the first week, a rhythm began to emerge. Clara learned the cadence of life on the ranch, the timing of feeding the animals, the weight of hay bales, the careful repair of fences against the relentless winds. Elias learned how to guide her without overbearing control, how to offer support while respecting her independence. Slowly, the cabin became a space of shared life, and the ranch, once a daunting wilderness, began to feel like home. In those early days, neither Elias nor Clara admitted it aloud, but an unspoken bond was forming. Trust, tentative but growing, threaded through their interactions, built on shared labor, mutual respect, and the recognition that, in this harsh yet beautiful land, they needed each other to survive. And beneath that practical alliance, something more fragile yet enduring, the stirrings of hope, connection, and perhaps the beginnings of love began to take root. Weeks passed on the ranch, and the initial tension between Clara and Elias began to ease, replaced by something quieter, more enduring. Life on the plains was harsh and demanding, yet in that shared struggle, a subtle bond began to form. Trust, fragile and tentative at first, was being built in small moments. A hand offered to steady a horse, a patient explanation of how to mend a broken fence, or the simple act of bringing water during a scorching afternoon. Clara, once wary of every man's intentions, began to see Elias as someone whose presence was not a threat, but a shelter in the storm of her life. Elias noticed the changes in Clara as well. At first, he had treated her with distant care, mindful of the transactional shadow of her arrival. But her resilience, intelligence, and the quiet dignity she carried even under duress had slowly broken down his emotional barriers. Her courage in facing each day, her careful attention to the animals, and her willingness to learn impressed him. He had never encountered a woman like her, not in the town. Not in his past encounters, and the admiration he felt was growing into something deeper, something he had long thought he was incapable of experiencing again. They spent long hours together, working the land in a rhythm dictated by necessity. Elias would ride ahead to check the fences while Clara trailed, gathering eggs or repairing the chicken coop. Sometimes they paused to catch their breath or observe the horizon, the wind tugging at their hair and the prairie stretching endlessly before them. It was in these moments of quiet companionship that their connection deepened. Words were few, but the understanding was profound. They began to anticipate each other's needs. Elias would carry water without being asked. Clara would prepare a meal at just the right time. Their partnership became seamless, a dance learned through experience and mutual respect. Shared laughter began to punctuate their days, subtle at first, a chuckle at a stubborn mule, a light-hearted remark about a particularly messy chore. These small bursts of joy carried more weight than either of them realized. For Clara, laughter was a sign that the fear and despair of her past were loosening their grip. For Elias, it was a reminder that life, even in its isolation, could still contain warmth and happiness. Trust also grew through moments of vulnerability. Clara confided, in quiet whispers by the fire, fragments of her past. The pain of being abandoned, the betrayal of her mother, the fear of raising a child alone. Elias listened without judgment, offering only steady presence and gentle reassurance. He shared pieces of his own history too, the loneliness that had marked his years, the dreams of family that had never materialized. Each revelation, carefully given and respectfully received, knit their lives closer together. What had begun as a transactional arrangement was slowly transforming into a genuine emotional connection, built on honesty, respect, and shared humanity. As the seasons shifted, so too did the landscape of their relationship. Winter winds brought them together around the hearth, where they would sit in companionable silence, hands busy with mending clothes or tending the fire. Spring thawed not only the frozen land, but also the remnants of mistrust that lingered in their hearts. Elias began to see Clara not as a responsibility, but as a partner, someone whose presence enriched his life beyond measure. Clara, in turn, felt a sense of belonging she had never known, a rare comfort in a man who had once been a stranger. By the end of this chapter in their lives, their bond was unmistakable. It was not yet romantic, not yet a love fully realized, but it was far more than convenience or duty. It was a connection forged in adversity, tempered by patience, and nurtured by trust. Both knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, yet they faced it with a quiet confidence that, together, they could endure anything. In the harsh beauty of the prairie amidst the endless work and the solitude Elias and Clara had discovered, the first glimmers of hope, not just for survival, but for the possibility of life transformed, of hearts opening where once there had been only fear. Life on the ranch had begun to settle into a steady rhythm, yet the tranquility that Clara and Elias had fought to establish was not immune to the harsh realities of the frontier. It came first as whispers, rumors in town about the girl the rancher bought, a mixture of curiosity, gossip, and thinly veiled judgment. Townspeople who had once kept their distance now stared a little too long when Elias rode into the market, or when Clara ventured in town for supplies. Though Elias tried to ignore their opinions, the murmurs stung in ways he did not expect. Clara, who had grown accustomed to being scorned and mistrusted, felt the old familiar ache of shame rise within her. Together, They faced the subtle hostility of a community that could not comprehend their arrangement, forcing them to rely on each other's quiet strength more than ever. Nature, too, reminded them that the plains were not gentle. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the ranch, winds whipping through the pastures with violent force. Rain lashed at the roof, lightning split the sky, and the cattle stampeded, frightened and panicked. Elias and Clara worked side by side, shouting over the roar of the wind, lassoing the animals, reinforcing broken fences, and moving the more vulnerable livestock to shelter. The chaos left them drenched, exhausted, and mud-splattered, but it also revealed the depth of their reliance on one another. Clara's agility and courage in corralling the frightened animals earned Elias's quiet admiration, while his steady guidance and unwavering composure offered her a sense of safety she had never known. In the eye of the storm, their bond deepened in a way words could not express. But nature was not their only challenge. A stranger arrived in town, an opportunistic man who had heard of Clara's past and saw potential profit in exploiting it. He approached Elias with veiled threats, attempting to assert leverage over the young woman's life. Elias's temper, usually restrained, flared as he refused to yield to intimidation. Clara, for the first time, felt the strength of a protector who would not waver, whose courage was matched by a sense of justice and loyalty. The encounter left them both shaken, yet more resolute. They understood that the world outside the ranch could be cruel and dangerous, but that together they were capable of standing firm. Amid these external threats, the emotional stakes intensified. Clara's pregnancy became a source of worry. Each minor discomfort, each sudden pain, sent them both into heightened vigilance. The thought of losing the child, or of being unprepared for birth on the remote ranch, weighed heavily on their minds. Elias, who had always been self-reliant, now realized the depth of his vulnerability, and Clara, who had learned to protect herself through caution, found comfort in his growing dedication. Their lives were entwined not only by circumstance, but by necessity, and each challenge reinforced the fragile trust and interdependence between them. Despite the danger and uncertainty, there were moments of tenderness that reminded them why enduring the hardships was worth it. After the storm, as they repaired fences under a tentative sun, Elias paused to offer Clara a hand up onto a fallen beam, and she allowed herself to smile for the first time in days. The small gestures, the shared labor, the quiet acknowledgement of each other's fears, the laughter that surfaced even amidst chaos became anchors in their storm-tossed world. By the end of this chapter, Clara and Elias had emerged from the threats changed, their bonds strengthened by adversity. The ranch, once simply a place of work and survival, had become a crucible in which trust, respect, and the first glimmers of love were forged. They had faced judgment, violence, and the unpredictability of nature together, and in doing so, discovered that their connection was resilient. Each day's challenge, whether from the world outside or from life itself, served to deepen the quiet certainty growing between them, that together they could withstand whatever trials lay ahead, and perhaps in time find the miracle they had both longed for. The days leading up to Clara's labor were tense, yet filled with a quiet anticipation that neither Elias nor Clara could fully articulate. The ranch had become more than a place of survival. It was a home, a sanctuary shaped by their shared labor, growing trust, and the delicate, unspoken bond between them. The arrival of a child, Clara's child, carried the weight of hope, fear, and the promise of a future neither had dared to imagine before. Elias, who had spent a lifetime in solitude, felt a nervous excitement he could not suppress. He had always dreamed of family, yet now, as the possibility drew near, he found himself unprepared for the depth of emotion it stirred within him. Clara's labor began in the quiet pre-dawn hours, the wind whispering through the open plains and the stars fading as the first light crept across the horizon. Elias remained at her side, a steady presence, his hands guiding and supporting, offering what comfort he could without words. Clara, in pain yet resolute, drew strength from his calm demeanor. She had survived so much already, and now, despite fear and exhaustion, she allowed herself to trust him completely. Every contraction, every cry, bound them closer together, transforming the ranch into a chamber of life, struggle, and ultimate renewal. The hours stretched long and grueling. Elias fetched water, adjusted blankets, and whispered encouragement when Clara's strength faltered. He marveled at her endurance, at the courage required to bring life into a world so uncertain. The labor tested them both, not just physically, but emotionally, forcing them to confront vulnerabilities, fears, and the raw intensity of hope and desperation. Yet through it all, there was a quiet intimacy that could not be denied, a bond forged in shared endurance and mutual reliance. And then, in the turning of the morning, the moment came. Clara's cries gave way to a tiny wail, a fragile, perfect sound that echoed across the cabin and beyond into the fields. Elias held his breath, overcome with awe, as the newborn was placed in Clara's arms. Tears streamed down her face, mingling with sweat and the dust of the labor, and Elias found himself uncharacteristically speechless, feeling a surge of love and wonder he had never thought possible. The child, warm and alive, was a miracle in its most literal and emotional sense, not merely a new life, but a symbol of hope, endurance, and the unanticipated beauty that can arise from even the harshest circumstances. For Clara, holding her baby was transformative. All the fear, despair, and isolation of her past seemed to dissolve in that moment. Here was a being wholly dependent on her, yet offering unconditional presence and love in return. Her heart, once guarded and wary, opened to the possibility that life could be kinder than she had believed. And in Elias she saw reflection and affirmation. He too was changed, his solitude and longing transformed into a protective, tender devotion that embraced both mother and child. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, sacred rhythm. Elias tended to the ranch and to Clara with a new intensity, more attentive, more gentle, more present. He marveled at the child's every small movement, every sigh and yawn, discovering a depth of feeling he had never known. Clara, in turn, began to relax, to laugh softly again, to teach Elias the tender routines of caring for a newborn. Together they navigated the challenges of feeding, cleaning, and soothing the baby, learning, adjusting, and growing in tandem. By the end of the first week, the miracle of birth had rippled beyond the immediate joy. It had transformed the ranch itself from a place of survival and solitude into a home brimming with life and possibility. Elias, who had long feared he would never experience the family he yearned for, now held within his grasp the very thing he had long waited for: a child, a family, and a future that promised more than mere survival. Clara, once sold and alone, had found safety, love, and purpose beyond imagining. The miracle was not only the birth of a child, but the birth of hope, trust, and the first true sense of belonging in a world that had once seemed so unforgiving. The weeks following the birth of Clara's child were a period of profound change, not only in the rhythms of daily life on the ranch, but in the hearts of both Clara and Elias. The newborn's cries, laughter, and tiny movements became the pulse of their days, demanding attention, care, and patience. Yet beyond the physical responsibilities, something far more significant was unfolding. A slow, deliberate emotional transformation that neither of them had anticipated, but both welcomed with cautious joy. For Elias, the presence of the child stirred emotions long buried under years of solitude and routine. He had spent so many seasons tending to the land, so many nights alone with nothing but the wind and stars for company, that he had forgotten the capacity of the human heart to expand to care and to love with abandon. Watching Clara cradle the baby, speaking softly to soothe it, or laughing at its innocent antics, Elias felt a tenderness in himself that he had never known. It was not merely the fulfillment of a desire for family. It was a deeper realization that love could arrive in unexpected forms, demanding vulnerability and patience, yet rewarding them with richness and meaning far beyond wealth or comfort. Clara, too, was transformed. The traumas of her past, the betrayal by her mother, the shame imposed by society, the fear of raising a child alone had left deep scars. Yet with Elias's steady presence and the miracle of new life in her arms, those wounds began to soften. She felt a renewed sense of worth, the quiet understanding that she was not merely a possession or a burden, but a woman capable of nurturing, deserving of care, and worthy of respect. She saw in Elias a partner who would stand beside her, who would share the burdens and joys of life, and in doing so, she allowed herself to trust fully for the first time. Their connection deepened through simple acts of intimacy and mutual reliance. Mornings were spent feeding the child, tending animals, and repairing fences together. Yet even the most mundane tasks became moments of closeness. Elias would catch Clara's hand when she faltered under the weight of a task, and she would offer a reassuring smile when he doubted his own abilities. Each gesture, no matter how small, reinforced the bond they had built, a bond grounded in trust, shared experience, and the recognition of one another's humanity. As the days turned into weeks, they began to confront the shadows of their pasts. Elias spoke of the loneliness that had haunted him for years, the yearning for a family that had seemed forever beyond reach. Clara shared stories of her mother's cruelty, the abandonment by the man who had impregnated her, and the fears she had carried for months. In sharing these truths, they found not judgment, but acceptance and compassion. Pain, once isolating and raw, became a bridge connecting their hearts, allowing each to heal in the presence of the other. The ranch itself, once a symbol of isolation, now felt alive with love. The laughter of the child echoed through the fields, blending with the lowing of cattle and the rustling of wind through the prairie grasses. Even the hardships of frontier life, the harsh sun, biting winds, and long tiring days were tempered by the sense of family and purpose that had grown among them. Every obstacle became an opportunity to demonstrate care and commitment, to build a life that was no longer defined by fear or loneliness, but by mutual devotion and hope. By the time the first winter frost approached, the emotional transformation was undeniable. Elias and Clara had evolved from cautious allies into partners in every sense, their hearts entwined by shared labor, shared hardship, and the miracle of life they had created together. The child, once a symbol of vulnerability, had become the center of a family forged through courage, trust, and love. They had faced fear, betrayal, and the uncertainty of the frontier, emerging stronger and closer than either could have imagined. In each other, they had found not only solace and companionship, but a profound, enduring loved one that would sustain them through every trial the future might hold. Winter had passed, and the first hints of spring began to paint the plains with soft greens and delicate blooms. The ranch, once a place of solitude and hard labor, had transformed into a sanctuary of life, warmth, and hope. The lowing of cattle, the gentle cooing of Clara's child, and the steady rhythm of daily chores created a comforting harmony that echoed through the open land. What had begun as a rescue, a transaction shrouded in moral ambiguity, had blossomed into a family bound not by circumstance alone, but by love, trust, and shared resilience. Elias Kane, once a lonely rancher who had known only the company of the wind, stars, and cattle, now awoke each morning to the sound of laughter. The presence of Clara and the child filled the cabin with life and purpose, transforming it from a house into a home. Elias's stoic exterior softened, the lines of loneliness gradually giving way to the warmth of connection. Each day brought small joys, the child's first steps, Clara's quiet smile across the kitchen, the gentle brush of her hand as they worked together on the land. These moments were treasures, evidence of a life reshaped by compassion, courage, and the miracle they had nurtured together. Clara, once sold and abandoned, had discovered safety and dignity beyond her wildest hopes. The ranch had become her refuge, but more importantly, it had become a place where she could reclaim her sense of self. She found confidence in her skills tending animals, managing the household, and guiding the child through the world and joy in the simple, honest pleasures of ranch life. Her bond with Elias deepened with each shared task and quiet conversation, evolving from tentative trust into profound love. In him, she saw a partner who respected her, protected her, and cherished her, not out of obligation, but out of genuine devotion. The child, a living testament to their shared resilience, flourished under their care. Every coo, every step, every smile strengthened the invisible threads that tied their hearts together. The miracle they had longed for was no longer a distant dream. It was alive, tangible, and shaping their lives in ways that neither could have imagined. Through the eyes of the child, they rediscovered wonder, hope, and the unspoken promise that life, even after hardship and loss, could hold beauty and joy. The townspeople, once skeptical and judgmental, gradually came to respect the transformation that had occurred. They saw Clara thriving, Elias devoted, and the child growing healthy and happy. While some whispers remained, most recognized that the ranch was no longer a symbol of isolation or scandal, but of resilience, redemption, and the enduring power of love. Elias and Clara's example quietly challenged preconceptions, showing that family could be forged in unexpected ways and that kindness, courage, and trust could overcome even the harshest circumstances. Elias and Clara often found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The chance encounter in the marketplace, the moral dilemmas, the storms, the fears, and the miracles of birth, all of it had led to this new chapter. They had learned to navigate hardships together, to celebrate victories both large and small, and to cherish the fragile, fleeting moments that made life meaningful. In each other, they had discovered not only love but also strength, patience, and a sense of purpose that had eluded them both for so long. As the sun set over the prairie, casting golden light across the fields and hills, Elias, Clara, and their child stood together outside the cabin. The wind carried the faint scent of fresh grass and earth, a reminder that life continued, resilient and beautiful. In that moment, there was no fear, no loneliness, and no lingering shadows of the past, only the promise of a future built on trust, compassion, and the extraordinary miracle of life they had nurtured together. The ranch, once a place of hardship and isolation, had become a home filled with love, laughter, and hope. And for Elias, Clara, and their child, this was not merely a beginning, it was a rebirth, the fulfillment of dreams long deferred, and a testament to the enduring power of human connection.